Hello and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We talk everything animation here, including The Prince of Egypt, which we'll be getting into right now because it is the 20th anniversary of the release of said film. I am Mel Moyer, and today I am joined by Beatriz Mourad.
Hello.
And Justin Cummings.
Hello.
Yay. So like I said, we'll be discussing The Prince of Egypt today. In honor of its big anniversary year. You can find out more about this podcast at overlyanimated.com. You can subscribe to us on iTunes at overlyanimated.com/iTunes, where we appreciate your star ratings, or search Overly Animated on your favorite podcatcher. So, Prince of Egypt. It's interesting because this isn't one we've discussed before, obviously, but I feel like it's like since the advent of sort of microblogging and that sort of thing, like it's kind of gotten like a cult following a bit. There's a lot of there's a Prince of Egypt fandom. I think it's just a general like DreamWorks fandom, I suppose. Like on Tumblr and that sort of thing. But essentially, it is the animated rendering of the story of Exodus, which is interesting. But if you guys just want to go around the horn real quick with your sort of introduction, I guess, to the movie, first time you saw it, if you have any special relationship with it, and that sort of thing. So we'll start with Beatrice.
So I thought the movie I was getting was Sinbad. So because the animation style is a little similar in terms of like, I don't know. I just thought they were similar, and I saw GIFs of Sinbad's villain or like the goddess of chaos on Tumblr, and I was like, sign me up. So I hadn't seen Prince of Egypt. So when the opportunity to be on the podcast came up, I thought this is a great opportunity to see it. Why not? So I was ready for my giant lady with amazing hair, and I got the story of Exodus instead, and it was fine. It was great. But just to give you an idea of like the mindset of like, I had a brief moment of just jarring confusion. Mm-hmm. But beside that, again, I just recently saw the film and I enjoyed it. I have thoughts on it that we're probably going to get into later. But yeah, so I'm kind of a newbie in this, in terms of fandom. I think the one actual accurate thing I knew about the film was that meme of that meme of like the hug, but like going backwards, the betrayal, I guess. Or
the reverse version of it. Sometimes they do reverse.
Yeah, so I guess that's the one bad thing about meme culture. That was supposed to be like a very like big moment, and then I was just like, "Oh, that's a meme."
Yeah,
but
that'll do it.
But that's just the time we're living in, I guess. So I'm here just to kind of provide the newcomer perspective without having been influenced by the 20 years since it's been released.
Nice, Justin.
I love the classic 5 2D DreamWorks films that were made, and I think of those, this is probably the best. They're all good, but I think this one stands as the best one that they made, and we'll get into why later. But I saw this when I was younger, but of course back then I was like, oh, this is the boring one compared to the movies of all, the talking animals and the cool fun sidekicks and the big monsters. And then I just rewatched it this week and I was like, holy crap, this movie's amazing. Like, compared to like the others of that time period, I'm like, I saw this when I was, 7. I maybe shouldn't have seen this at 7.
Yeah, that is something we are going to get into too. Is why are kids of a certain age watching this movie? But yeah, so my own personal sort of thing with it is like, I don't recall the first time I watched it. I just remember like I had it on VHS, if we want to date myself that way. And yeah, I mean, it was just like a thing that I used to watch. I used to think it was pretty scary. I remember seeing it in theaters because I specifically remember seeing the burning bush scene in theaters. So I saw it in theaters at some point, unless it's like a fake memory, who knows. But I really enjoyed it. I didn't have come to have an appreciation for it or anything like that until I was like way older, like in college, and it was on Netflix, and we were like, oh, let's watch The Prince of Egypt. And then you watch it and you're like, oh wow, this is like intense. And just a very good film. But yeah, I mean, it's stuck around kind of in the consciousness for 20 years now, and we'll get into the end, like kind of things that are still going on with it now. Obviously, it's become a meme thing on Tumblr with certain scenes getting gifted pretty well, and people like use it a lot they use the music a lot in like fandom stuff. They'll make dramatic gift sets with song lyrics from the movie and that sort of thing. So it's still culturally relevant even outside of its subject matter. But basically, the crash course on the history of this film was that Jeffrey Katzenberg had always had this idea to create a animated version of the Ten Commandments. Disney said no, and he kind of shelved it until the creation of DreamWorks in the 90s, when basically Steven Spielberg, who was involved at that time, said, "Oh, you should do that movie." So they went in to do it. Not shocking that Disney said no to this. But it was also at a time when Disney's animation department wasn't super as robust as we know it is today. But yeah, I think, Justin, you mentioned when we were talking about this, is that basically this was one of the catalysts for the creation of DreamWorks.
Right. There was one of not the main DreamWorks as a whole, but like the animation division of DreamWorks. There was one movie before this, and that was Ants, which we kind of all push off to the side a bit. But this was, this was why Jeffrey Katzenberg left Disney, was to make this. He was a co-founder and the CEO of DreamWorks Animation. Like, this was his passion project. So it explains why this movie was the way it was, and why early DreamWorks was the way it was, is it was created for a reason, not just to cash in, not just to be another animated studio, but specifically to make the movies Disney wouldn't make.
Like Shrek. No.
Eventually, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, like, once they got into it, like, they very much did get into it. I mean, they brought in theological scholars from various religions. They brought in historians to make it as, accurate to the time period and accurate to the story as they could. Like, it is, like you said, it was a total, just threw everything in their passion project. And it's interesting because it is one of so around the time of the early 90s, this one came out way later. It came out in 1998. But in 1992, or I guess it was 1991 technically, when Beauty and the Beast came out, it became technically the first Disney-Pixar collaboration, because they utilized Pixar's CAP system to render the ballroom scene in 3 dimensions, and it kind of became the first like big hybrid film like that. This, however, in 1998, or not however, but 1998 rolls around, this is another version of that, but it uses, it's obviously not Disney, it's not Pixar, it's Toon Boom Animation and Silicon Graphics, which I don't really know I don't think they've done much since then. Toon Boom is up in Canada. I'm not sure where Silicon Graphics is, but, it's these two smaller animation companies putting together this gorgeous film. But yeah, I don't know if anyone has anything to sort of speak to the animation there, because I think that's one of DreamWorks had such and DreamWorks did Sinbad, correct? I think they did do Sinbad.
Yes.
So that's probably why you thought you were getting Sinbad, because they had similar animation styles between them. But yeah, if anyone has any particular thoughts or emotions towards the animation.
I mean, it's gorgeous.
So,
sorry, continue, Justin.
No, Toon Boom is not. It's not actually an animation company. It's a software that I actually had to learn it briefly for a class, and it was a pain in my butt. But so basically, they licensed. It would be like, it's basically the animation equivalent of a movie being made entirely in Adobe Premiere. The fact that they used this kind of just off-the-shelf software, especially back in '98, and they made something this gorgeous. I can show you my Toon Boom project. It's garbage.
We will put that up in the podcast notes next to it so you can compare.
Yeah, just post my Toon Boom, just to show that, like, this is really impressive using the technology they used. It's like when you use MS Paint and make a Picasso. Like I'm very impressed they managed to pull this off with Toon Boom.
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to throw in there, Beatrice?
Oh, I mean, it's less about kind of the techniques and more just it's really pretty. It's just really pretty, and you don't see this type of style anymore, really. So the fact that I think part of the reason why it's survived so long as well is because of the animation, because it is so stunning, and because it's something that we don't see enough of anymore, and it's celebrated, and it's a shame because it's truly, from the facial expressions to the way that they use the style to represent the scenery, like the setting, and it's just all of it just works so well. And it was when I was watching, I was just thinking, often, as it often happens whenever I watch 2D animation, it's just this kind of constant reminder of, oh, what was the cost of Pixar becoming as big as it did, and Disney and the Pixar merger and stuff. It's another kind of reminder of the impacts certain things in the industry, certain events in the industry, the impact they had on just the actual products of the animation.
It's interesting you say facial expressions, because that's one of my big things that I always remember of this movie is the scene where Moses comes back and he and Ramesses go to talk after the bit with the snake or whatever in the throne room. And he's sitting there, and, Ramses thinks it's going to be great. We're going to be back together. And Moses is like, no, actually. And he's got the ring in his hand and his eyes are closed. And, the way his, eyebrows just move, always, it freaked me out. But, it always just, it's so expressive. And I think about what, you bring up, the Pixar Disney merger, what, Kristen Anderson Lopez said, who worked as is the lyricist on Frozen. She said that in animation, all of the emotion of the characters is in the eyebrows, which is true, I think, definitely for these Pixar films, but I feel like in something like The Prince of Egypt, you get so much more of a range there, which is interesting, because you're looking at it, it's technically antiquated technology, it's an old form of animation that's pretty much not used anymore, but I feel like you get so much more expression and so much more reaction in a film like this than you do in something like, Frozen or The Incredibles, and that, also has a lot of other variables in it in terms of how Disney wants to portray its characters and its attractive characters specifically and that sort of thing. There was a whole kerfluffle about that. But that's it, right? They don't make things like this anymore, where you've just got such expressive animation on these 2D people, but if you want to get, be a jerk about it, they're technically drawings, and, you just get such emotion out of it. And it is kind of sad that, we're not going to probably for a long time have something this firing on all cylinders the way this did between animation and music and writing.
Yeah.
But to the writing, so this movie is one of those things where I feel like we really need to have a rating between PG and PG-13.
Yeah. That was something I wanted to ask you. Was it rated PG?
I believe it was.
Yes.
I can't find any. It definitely wasn't G. I mean, I hope it wasn't. It was probably PG.
Well, it came out in 98, right? And
yeah.
I think, what was the first PG-13 movie? Wasn't it?
It wasn't Temple of Doom, but it should have been Temple of Doom. It was right around then.
Right.
So PG-13 was pretty well established by 98.
Okay. Gotcha.
I think the issue is we're looking at it through modern PG eyes, not 98 PG eyes.
Yeah.
Goonies is PG. And this is in the same vein as that. E.T. is PG, and that slips in some stuff too, where today Frozen is PG, when it really should be
Frozen PG?
Frozen is PG, yes.
I thought that would have been
And as G has basically become synonymous not with all ages, but specifically for little kids, companies have been pushing for a PG rating as much as possible, and so PG has become more of the for the whole family as opposed to just for little kids. And so a lot of the impact of PG movies. Like, you look at early 2000s, late 90s PG movies, they're all like this of how does that in here? Because today's PG is so, so different.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, because on the one hand, you're like, all right, so, you know, this is something that everyone can enjoy. You know, it's got some scary bits, and there is that one time when he turns an entire river into blood. But, you know, it's interesting because it's like, okay, but how much of this goes over kids' heads? Like, that's my one thing, too, that I think about a lot when it comes to ratings. It's not just like, oh, can they handle this? Is it too scary? Is it too graphic? It's like, how much of this are they going to digest? Like, there's so much in this story and the animation and the nuances of everything. It's like, it's made for, you know, somebody who has the mental capacity, to, you know, understand all that. But it's like, you know, a 6-year-old isn't going to, you know, enjoy the dramatic, weight of this film. You know what I mean? So, you know, it's one of those interesting things where it's like, we need, like, I feel like we need something between PG and PG-13, that says, like, you know, maybe 10 to 12 or something like that. But this movie, I feel like, is a great example of, such a necessity.
Do you think that this movie would have, had it come out today, it would have been rated PG-13?
No, I don't
Yes.
think so. You think so?
I think it would.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me why.
I mean, I don't know. I just think
Because 9 is PG-13.
Is that really?
Yeah.
Wow.
and not just that, but I mean, this is dealing with a lot of like like, you know, in the beginning, I don't remember Moses' wife's name, but you know, when they first meet, she's being sold as a sex slave. Essentially, they were selling her to, like, they were giving her as a gift to him. Yeah. So, you know, there are certain things that are just, I could easily see them as being. I think another one was that's more recent is The Breadwinner, where it's not necessarily like showing you a lot of like it's not graphically jarring or anything, but because certain elements of like misogyny, of like anger and oppression, they're so strong, and those themes that they move it as into a PG-13 realm. Granted, that's like a war film, so it's more easy to swallow why that's a PG-13 movie. But yes, I just think there's certain things in this film that perhaps, you know, for instance, another kind of biblical film that's animated, The Star, that came out last year. I think that, I don't even know if that was G or PG. It felt more G than PG.
It seemed to be about the animals more so than
no, totally. But what I mean is
got.
like, well, you know what I mean is like here's
That
like
was
another
PG.
similar, like there's a different ways of treating different biblical stories, and like a PG movie, I feel like nowadays would have been a biblical story, like an adaptation of that would have been more of a Star kind of thing, whereas a PG-13 one would have been more like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring that up too, because it's like, yes, like obviously to me, I'm like, oh yeah, like she's totally been being sold into, you know, sexual slavery. To me, that, you know, is just, oh, I understand that immediately, and that sucks. Like it occurred, you know, it's like they played it in such a way where there's really only one line that a kid might pick up on it when, you know, Ramsey says, have her brought to my chamber. And it's like, oh no. But, you know, as well, too, you know, you're dealing with a genocide as well. Like at the beginning of the entire film, the entire opening scene is
Slaves.
Yeah, slaves being, you know, these guys come into their house and just start killing babies, you know, and that happens again later in the movie. There's the continued theme of slaughtered children. So yeah, thinking of it that way, it's interesting because it's like people think, and people being me and other people, I guess, who have this mentality, it's, you think PG-13, you think, you know, curse words, people being, you know, violent on screen and that sort of thing, but it is more these nuanced things, like, you know, what's weaved into the story and what sort of, you know, violent background and just setting do you have for something like this that is a little bit much for a kid. And I remember a while back, somebody had this blog post about the Prince of Egypt and about the rating, like specifically about, you know, like how intense of a film it was, but how people were willing to overlook that or give it a PG rating because of the religious connotations of it. And certain people who subscribe to certain religions will, they will be very strict about certain things their kids can watch, but they are willing to let their censors sort of, go for a religious story. Because there's an occasion for it and there's like a lesson in it.
Yeah.
Which I think might have been
Absolutely
part of the
true.
mentality here too, just with the rating system itself. But it is a really intense movie. On the happier side of it, so Steven Schwartz did the music for this movie. It's a musical. That's the other thing too that I love about this. It's such an intense movie. It's basically, the story of Exodus, and it's a musical. People sing. It's great. But Steven Schwartz did the music for this, who would become famous later for Wicked. But he did the music and the lyrics, so good for him. The music, I think, is just really, again, it's one of those, yes, I love Alan Menken, I love Howard Ashman, and I love everything that comes out of Disney, but this wasn't, a Broadway-ready show that I feel like you were getting out of Disney at that time. Not that they were, putting out musicals, with the intent of making them into Broadway shows like they are now. But, they very much use Broadway shows as a basis to create their musicals. This was something that was much more I don't know what the word is for it, unique or dark or what have you, but it's it was a musical, but it wasn't a fun musical. There was real occasion for using the music in this. Alan Menken over at Disney used to say that basically I think it was him that said this, basically, you put a song in when the emotion or the plot becomes too much for the characters to verbalize, so they have to sing about it, essentially. And I feel like here you kind of really get that. It's not you don't have the I Want song, the formulaic, big ballad or whatever, but you've got these moments of super intense drama that are underscored by music. I mean, that opening song, Deliver Us, is and maybe that's what makes it easy to swallow. I guess for kids is that, you've got this entire opening scene where you see slaves and you see slaves being killed, but it's set to music, really dramatic music.
I mean, I agree with everything you've said. It didn't work for me.
Oh,
I think that's just the one aspect of the film that didn't work for me. I just wish the film didn't have that type of I mean, I don't even know how to properly verbalize this. I think the best way to do it is maybe it's because I'm just so conditioned to this kind. I don't know. I'm just conditioned to a certain type of music that, the most recent John Mulaney comedy special on Netflix came out, and he had a little bit where he talked about psalms. Whenever he went to church, there were these psalms that weren't, and the joke was that he was saying that they weren't songs, they were psalms. They didn't quite sound like songs, but they were something else. And I think that's what these were. They weren't really songs because there wasn't this beautiful, graceful melody, but there was a lot of emotion and meaning in there and all this stuff. And but I don't know. There are certain moments within a song, within a musical sequence that I'm oh, I like this. I like how this sounds. But then the rest happens, and I'm I can't. My mind and my ears, they can't connect one thing to another. And I don't know. I just felt like the movie would have been stronger had it not had music and had just been a straight drama. And I just felt like it was just, I don't know. For me, when watching it, it came out as they're putting music in this because every animated movie at the time had music in it. So they had to put music in it. And I just felt like they didn't have to. They could have just done it straight, and it would, in my opinion, would have worked better. But that's just me. And again, my music tastes are odd, so I wouldn't be surprised if I'm in the minority.
No, I mean, I think there's something to be said for that, because I do think, with everything that goes around this movie, it does seem like the one thing possibly out of place is the fact that it's a musical. And I think they try to offset that with, like, the fact that they do these sort of, like, darker, less sing-songy, songs that, you know, do have, you know, like, you know, you've got that opening, just very, like, rhythmic sounds, and, the song, that Jethro sings is, you know, very much inspired by, Jewish and other Middle Eastern music. But yeah, like I do see what you're saying there, where it's like, okay, the musical aspect of this feels like it's possibly a compromise to the trend of the time. Although it was on the back half of the trend in 1998, Disney was starting to get away from musical animation, slowly but surely. But Stephen Schwartz, like, looking at what he did in Wicked, it's like he is the perfect person to make music like this for a film like this that didn't want Disney sound and even traditional musical sound. Because if you listen to even the opening of Wicked, it's just like a mess of noise, but it's like such a tightly controlled mess of noise. But, you know, like, technically this is then the first thing that he ever did that I ingested. Obviously I didn't know about it until later, until I went to go see Wicked, and I was like, oh man, he did Prince of Egypt, that's so great. But yeah, so something for the little musical fans out there. Stephen Schwartz of Wicked and Godspell did the music in this.
And it's really funny how you say that Disney was they wanted him in particular because they wanted like a different sound than what Disney was doing, and yet, you know, several years later there's Frozen and they essentially made Defying Gravity again.
Yes, they basically reinvented the wheel with that one.
Basically.
Which, you know, it's like the never-ending circle of people, of art imitating itself, is, you know, Stephen Schwartz. Disney opposite.
It's a compliment.
Makes
it's a
Wicked.
compliment.
Yeah, makes Wicked. Disney then copies Wicked, makes Frozen. It's an interesting cycle. Justin, did you have any thoughts about the music? Are you ambivalent or?
I like the music a lot, but interestingly enough, Prince of Egypt is now a stage show.
It is. We're going to get into that in a bit.
With also, of course, done by Stephen Schwartz. So the one that we were talking about was not made to be a Broadway show, is now a show. But I find it interesting that he did work on a couple Disney movies, but not like the entire score, I think.
Yeah.
I think he maybe did... Which, interestingly enough, actually, it looks like the only one he did the songs and lyrics for before Prince of Egypt was Hunchback of Notre Dame.
He did Pocahontas as
yeah,
well.
that fits.
He did the lyrics for that one, yeah.
Now the ears are starting to connect the dots.
Yeah, he did Hunchback and he did some stuff in Pocahontas.
But you compare songs like Believe to, what is it? Is it God Save the Outcast? God Bless the Outcast? God Help the Outcast?
God Help the Outcast.
That one.
That's the one.
Bells of Notre Dame to Deliver Us, like, it's very... You can definitely tell it's the same person.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can hear that even in Wicked when he's got those choral bits. Like, he just does sort of very heavy music, heavy musical music. Like, if there was somebody who was kind of like the gothic, you know, not necessarily metal person in musicals, I feel like it would be Stephen Schwartz. Like, that's just like his style, is just doing very heavy, music. I think he did the lyrics in Pocahontas. I don't believe he did the music.
Correct.
But yeah, I mean, he's great. And I think it's just very impressive that he can do both music and lyrics, and it turns out, you know, the way it does. I think that's using two parts of your brain that don't normally coincide, so good for him. So something not so great about this film. Well, there's pros and cons, I guess, to, I don't know, the way that this film went about representing the cultures that it was representing. And this is something Beatrice specifically wanted to talk about. So I will let you lead this basically on the casting, representation, and all that stuff.
Well, I mean, I think first let's start with the positive. Let's start with like what they did do right, which is that they decided to actually properly represent the skin tone of people from Egypt and people from that time period, at least of what we know of that time period, because even now that's being debated. But you know, so they did do a proper job in terms of drawing people like they're supposed to look like. You know, my issue is the whitewashing of the voice cast. And people, like, often, a lot of times people say, well, look, on screen it isn't white, so it should be okay. But it's not. And, when I learned that this was essentially based on the Ten Commandments, I wasn't surprised by the voice cast, because this is something that's always been the case. Whenever there's a big, epic, either historical or biblical film during that time period. So the Ten Commandments in 1956, right? Ben-Hur, 1959, Cleopatra, even most recently, Exodus, Gods and Kings, 2014.
Oh my God, that was a bad one.
Yeah, but it's like often the case where you have this kind of very epic biblical story or historical story, whatever it is, and they tend to put white actors as the stars. And the same thing happened here, only instead of it being visual, it was just phonetic, like based on sound. The voice actors predominantly were white, and I thought that was ridiculous. Like, nothing against the actual performances, because the performances were great, but it's just kind of a testament that, once again, like, I don't know if it was because I don't think we had reached that point where animation studio, like animated movies, wanted to cast big names in order to draw people into the movie. I don't think it was a marketing thing back then, but or at least that trend of casting big stars was such a thing, or so present. I think that started really with Shrek, right? That was the big one, maybe, possibly. Or no, or maybe even Toy Story with Tom Hanks. Like, what am I talking about? But I don't know. It's just really a shame, because they do so well visually, and they just couldn't follow through. It is that question of like, well, if you don't see them, if it's just the voice, is it considered whitewashing? Mm-hmm. And I personally think it is. But that's up for debate. Like, they did do good, but at the same time, it's like 5 steps forward, but then 3 steps back. It's like, it can't be perfect, is the question of casting. Representation can never be too perfect, I guess, because that's too hard. Mm-hmm. And it was just frustrating, because all you need to do is, like, there are people that exist that have great voices, and they are from either Middle Eastern descent or Jewish descent. Just give me a Jewish actors, because this is a story that's from the Old Testament. Like, give me that. Yeah. If you're having actual, I think at that point it was Israelites. So if you're having Israelites, like, give me people who descended from that theology. So it's not hard, and yet they couldn't go through with it. And I just thought I couldn't talk about this film without mentioning that aspect.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, if you look at you've got Val Kilmer as Moses. You've got Patrick Stewart and God. You've got Patrick Stewart playing a pharaoh. You've got Ray Fiennes playing another pharaoh. You've got Helen Mirren playing the wife of the pharaoh. You've got Michelle Pfeiffer playing Zipporah, who was even in following looking at the old story. Zipporah was actually she wasn't Hebrew. She was, I forget exactly where she was meant to be from, but it was somewhere in the Middle East, where essentially her skin was darker than that of the Israelites. So that actually comes up in the Bible, that Miriam's... I took a course. I had to read the Bible twice in school, so this comes up a lot. But Miriam, Moses' brother, actually didn't like her all that much because she had darker skin. Like, it was literally a case of racism in the Bible. So you've got Zipporah, who's actually possibly, she's a woman of color, possibly even, like, black identifying, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. Like, come on. The only instances where we have really here of any sort of representation, like you said, Jeff Goldblum voices Aaron. And then you've got Ofra Haza, who voices Yocheved, who was she unfortunately passed away in 2000, but she was a very famous Israeli singer and actress who was born in Tel Aviv, but she's like the only person in the entire film. Like, the rest of it, it's Steve Martin and Martin Short play Hotep and Hoy. Like, it's a bunch of big white names. And then you've got maybe 2 or 3 people who have a cultural heritage connection to this story and to the location of where this story takes place. So I agree. And I think that, whitewashing a voice cast is something that should be discussed because, you know, it's like you said, like people say, it's like, oh, it's their voices, it doesn't matter. But it's like, well, no, like you're making a story about this culture. Why shouldn't it be told by people, who have a hand in that? You know, I think Book of Life is a great example because with the exception of Channing Tatum, everyone who voiced a character in that film, well, Channing Tatum and I guess Ron Perlman, everyone who voiced a character in that film was of some Latino descent. And, you know, it was telling a story of Day of the Dead. And I think
not just that. I mean, and sorry to interrupt you, but not just that, but like even in those particular instances of casting, like that was like intentional from the director who was also Latino. Like Channing Tatum said, like, you know that I'm not Latino. Like I remember in an interview he said how like he told the director, he was like, you know, they're not Latino, right? Like I'm not like whatever. And he's like, no, that's the point. Or no, like he was like, no, it's okay. I want that. That's specifically why I want it the way I want it. So it's like, it's also falls into like whole, like who's making these movies, who's writing these movies. It's beyond just who's casting them. It's like, it's a very systemic kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, you know, and that's the thing is like, obviously, like, you know, I don't care that Channing Tatum's in there, but even if I did, it's not, you know, it's not my place to care because it's like, you know, the director who is Mexican said, yeah, I want you in my movie. Like, that's chill. That's fine. So it's like, okay, like, great. Like, the people who are telling this story, who are telling this cultural story, are making the decisions about how it's being told. But I always just think that's a great example of why and how you can get, like, a really great voice cast with people, you know, like, it's like, yes, we've got, you know, a huge population of white actors out there because that's what we've been shown, right? Like, that's the people who get cast. There are so many actors out there who aren't white, who identify as some form of ethnic minority, who you could cast in so many things and you can make such a great film. But, you know, it doesn't happen. I mean, everyone in The Prince of Egypt is like a huge name actor, like Val Kilmer, Ralph Fiennes, Michelle Pfeiffer, Sandra Bullock, Danny Glover, Patrick Stewart, Helen Mirren, Steve Martin. Like, you know, you purposely cast these huge, big name white actors instead of saying, you know, are there more actors like Ofer Haza? Like, why not get some Israeli voice actors, get more Jewish voice actors? But, you know, it is an unfortunate caveat to this because, like you said, like, they do such a great job of portraying ancient Egyptians, ancient Israelites, in the way that they were, you know, as far as we can tell, they were supposed to look, not, you know, Charlton Heston walking out there, pretending to be Moses. So it's, you know, it's like we were almost there and then we weren't. And that sucks. Unfortunately, it continues to be the way it is until, I think we allow directors of various cultures to, you know, take the helm on these things and allow them to cast and allow them to do these things. But, you know, there's only so much I can complain about and, you know, add to it. I mean, I am white myself, so it's like, you know, I'm going to complain to the point where somebody tells me to get back in my lane, and then I will. But I want to see it as well. So this is me complaining about it. Any thoughts on that, Justin?
Yes, to all of that. I definitely agree that they did a great job with the portrayal, but the voice cast, because I was rewatching with my girlfriend and she grew up without a lot of media, and so she was rewatching. She's like, "Wait a minute, that's Sandra Bullock. Wait, that's Jeff Goldblum. Wait, that's Val Kilmer." Like, slowly realizing how this entire movie is cast of like big name people. And looking back, I was thinking, you know, like, what big names from that time that were ethnic minorities could they have cast? And realizing just like how much an issue it was. Like, there's still not as many well-known minority actors now, simply because Hollywood's not casting them. And so, you know, like you said, that's a systemic issue. But looking back, especially in the late 90s, I'm like, I can't think of many that were that had the same kind of name power as 90s Val Kilmer.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot about kind of the system and how far we've come. But that's not an excuse, because like, you were willing to leave Disney to make this movie. Like, you've shown that you're willing to take risks. Like, you left a job at Disney, and I just think that they could have done better, and I'd like to think if they remade this, or not remade, but if they did a movie like this now, maybe we'd get better representation, but part of me doubts that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe we would, because while something like Exodus Gods and Kings still happens, recent thing that happened, but, you know, Coco happened, and that's from Disney. One of the very people who has track record of not doing good by that. I think especially nowadays, especially with the pressures of like from social media and people being a lot more vocal, I think had it been made today, we wouldn't have had the same cast, or at least the same equivalent. So the Michelle Pfeiffer of today, the Val Kilmer of today. But
Christian Bale would have been voicing something.
Oh, of course. But I feel like, I think today, I don't know if they would have made the same casting decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, we are unfortunately like crawling towards a better place here. But, and I think what makes this just so frustrating and kind of under a microscope for us is that it came so close because of such the great way that they represented these people in animation, that it's like, okay, if you pull back the curtain, it's like, oh, look at all these really famous white actors. That's great. Obviously we can't change it. It happened. But, we can say, great, you've got Jeff Goldblum as Aaron, and you've got Ofer Haza, a really celebrated Israeli singer and actress who did a great job in, the very small part that she had in the movie. She actually passed away only 2 years after the movie came out, so at least we have that. I mean, it's not perfect, but we're getting there.
I have one question about voice acting, because a lot of the characters had different, or if not all of them, they had different singers versus the actual speaking roles. Did anyone, do you think that they did a good job finding people who matched? Did that throw anyone off? Or
no, I think I was pretty good. Brian Stokes Mitchell is a really, he's got, for me at least, just because, I'm super into musicals, secretly, he's just a voice that I know, so when I hear him, I was like, oh, yeah, that's Brian Stokes Mitchell. That's somebody I can pick up. He was the singing voice of Jethro. But I think they all did pretty good. I can't think of anyone, who, surprised me. It's obviously I'm pretty sure Sandra Bullock wasn't doing that singing, but it's oh, it sounds close enough that, I can buy that.
Yeah.
And Ralph Fiennes did his own singing. Good for him.
Good for him.
Doing his talk singing. And Steve Martin and Martin Short both did their own singing. So good for them as well. But yeah, that is a thing, right? That I kind of sometimes have qualms about. I love Christopher Jackson, but I think it's so obvious how different his voice is from the actor who portrays the speaking voice of Moana's father in Moana. I think it's just such a change that it's a little bit obvious there. But no, I think they did good here.
Awesome.
I was good with it, yeah. Great. So, we mentioned this a little bit. So, the legacy of this is that they made I feel like it when it came out it wasn't a prequel, but it's referred to as a prequel now. It's the story of Joseph. It was a direct-to-video, prequel, basically, telling the story of Joseph, and I will always want to say Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I know that's not what it's called. It's just...
There's that theater interest popping back up.
Yeah, no, it's my go-to. It's just, it comes out so fast once it starts, I can't stop it. But Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors, which, was good. It was what it was. Same animation style, what have you. But the thing we mentioned earlier, or Justin brought up earlier, was there's a stage musical coming your way, or I guess it just premiered, of Prince of Egypt. It seems like what they're doing with this is kind of like what they did with, they being Disney, did with Hunchback of Notre Dame, where it's not on Broadway, it's playing internationally. which, by the way, if you ever get a chance to like see or hear anything from that stage adaptation of Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's very good. You should take a listen. It's kind of a big grievance in the Disney side of Tumblr that it still has not been granted a Broadway debut. But yeah, this is a full musical. They've got 29 songs. Darren Criss read for Moses during like during the workshopping of this, so there's that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I guess, enough about it to really comment on it. Just that it's been doing tryouts. It is currently I think it's currently in California, or no, it's in Denmark. It was testing out in California. It is now in Denmark. And I don't know if they have plans for it after that. I think they were just going to try and tour it to see what happened. But it is interesting, Justin, that you brought up that like this was kind of like the anti-Disney movie. But it's been kind of making these concessions we pointed out, with becoming a musical and chasing Disney's kind of motif of making their films into musicals, and now it's becoming a stage show. I just wonder, it's like, okay, like, you look at the Hunchback of Notre Dame version of the stage show, it really pulls from the book and makes itself a lot more like the original story. So I wonder here if they change bits around to make it, I don't necessarily say more adult, just because A, we've established that this is a pretty PG-13 film to begin with, and B, I, don't subscribe to the mentality that animated films have to be for kids. But it is interesting. It's like, okay, well, what's your occasion for bringing this to the stage? Like, what are you adding to the story, I guess? So, I don't know. It's something to check out. There's, like, zero information on it, but you should check it out. And if you're in Denmark, go to the Fredericia Theater, and check it out. It includes all the songs from the original movie, and then it's got, like, 15 or 16 new ones, so I don't know.
Apparently it's coming to Utah. It's going to be in Ivins, Utah on July 13th.
There you go. If you're in Ivins, Utah, get on it and
or if you
tell us how it is.
Or if you saw it in California last October, let us know. Like, I want to know if this is good.
Yeah. Yeah,
if you happen to live in California, Utah, or Denmark, hit us up.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find too much information about this, so somebody tell me if this is worth hunting down or not. I love, I love Stephen Schwartz, so, I'm down for anything he makes. That's why I'm surprised it's an out of town. I feel like at this point, Stephen Schwartz could totally have the clout to say, I want to put this on Broadway. But, whatever. I guess that works. Alright, so, does anyone have any lasting, impactful thoughts about this film to share?
I really like the disclaimer they put at the very beginning of the film. I don't know if you guys paid any attention to that, but I thought that was really cool because we talk a lot about, it's been, this year especially, it's been a big discussion of, how do we deal with material that may be controversial. Simpsons just had this with Apu, you guys probably saw.
Yeah.
And talking about, how do we deal with things from the past and the way we view them now. And I've seen this kind of disclaimer before in other places. I know Assassin's Creed has a similar one. Whenever they show any of the Forbidden Looney Tunes cartoons, they always have something like this. But just, I like that they were like, this is what it's from. We changed it. We believe we're staying true to what it is. And if you want to see the original, this is where to find it. This is something that used to happen a lot with when film censorship was a lot higher in like the 40s and 50s. They would have these kinds of intertitles, and I thought they did a very good job with that. And I thought it showed a level of care that isn't really present in a lot of films that try to tackle religious content.
Wait, but I don't think it was like censorship. I think it was just it was a disclaimer because it wasn't like, say, the Forbidden like Looney Tune cartoons or even the Disney ones. It was just simply like, look, this is our interpretation of a biblical text. Sometimes interpretations are controversial, but we think it's we got the essence of it. So I don't think it was
exactly
controversy in terms of like, oh, this is dated and we're still going to show it to you, but understand that it was from a different time.
Yeah.
Right. It's definitely different from that one, but I like it's the same kind of idea of we want to say something to you before you watch this. Even though it's for a different reason, but I think that it's the same kind of essence of, we think that it's important we tell you this before you watch the movie, and I think that they handled it very maturely.
Yeah.
I agree. And yeah, like we said, that even went into the production of it, where they brought in scholars from various schools of thought in Western religions to basically talk about it. I do know that the film still was censored in countries that had a high Muslim population because you're not allowed to portray a prophet, or at least somebody who is Islamic can't, as I understand it, see the image of a prophet, I guess, as rendered by in art. So in there it was censored, but it's like, that wasn't censorship so much, it was respecting religious and cultural laws. But no, I agree, like there's that opening text is very great. And yeah, I mean, it's, there's so much about this movie that I like, so much that I think was like very brave with it, some of it that I wish had gone so much farther than it did. But I liked it. Beatrice, how did you feel about your first, your 2018 viewing of what you thought was going to be Sinbad?
I enjoyed it. It's a very ambitious film. Very ambitious. So I had to make some concessions. Like there were certain things that they had to kind of skim past because of just the scope of the story they wanted to tell. And I understand that. Even though I wanted them to stay a little bit more or expand a little bit more on certain things, I understand why they couldn't. And I think that they were very graceful with giving their rating and giving the heaviness of the story. They were very graceful in doing that dance between the two, of what they could show and what they didn't show. So yeah, it's a very well made movie. Still wish it didn't have the music, and I still wish they had a better cast. But despite that, like it's a great celebration of what animation used to be. And I love that it's on Netflix so that people can just like see the magic of 2D, and maybe hopefully in the future there'll be someone that will see it and be inspired and say, hey, I want to make a 2D movie, not a 3D, not a computer generated one. So yeah.
Cool. All right. So, find out all the info on this podcast at overlyanimated.com. Join us on the Discord to text chat about animation at overlyanimated.com/Discord. Support us via Patreon at patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to our current patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Sam, aka Yosemite Sam. And thanks, as always, to our Patreon executive producers, John, Ryan, Steve, Alex, Andy, and Hugh. Anyone have anything they need to share for the good of their social media?
You can follow me on Twitter at Beatriz Mourad. And I have a YouTube channel, which now that summer's starting up again, I'm going to start posting more on. The Be Real Movie channel.
Good. Justin, anything?
I'm a hermit.
Okay. I have a book out if anyone's curious.
Get her book!
You can buy my book. I do have a book. This is revelatory to everyone. Yes. The Rules of Me by Mel Moyer. You can buy it literally anywhere.
Yeah.
You can buy it at Barnes & Noble, your favorite indie bookstore, my mindset. And you can buy it on Amazon if you want to do that. But, support your local bookstore. Check it out. It's great. I like it. I wrote it. All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time. Au revoir.
Bye.
Bye.